Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had to stop a corrupted Justice League alone. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world tore apart with the sound of screaming canvas. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was a blur of green lightning and black tendrils, a living storm of controlled chaos in the heart of Mizutsufu. The next, he was tumbling through a non-space that defied physics and assaulted the senses. Colors bled into sounds, the scent of ozone tasted like static, and the gravitational pull felt like it was coming from inside his own bones, trying to turn him inside out. The fight had been messy. The villain, a wiry man calling himself Unauthorized, possessed a quirk as unstable as his psyche. He didn't open clean gates or portals. He clawed at the very fabric of reality, creating weeping, jagged wounds in the air that flickered in and out of existence. A building to his left had been partially scooped out, its rebar skeleton now twisting into a street in what looked like feudal Japan. A car to his right was half submerged in a shimmering portal that smelled of brine and ancient jungle. "You can't pin me down, hero!" Unravel had cackled, his form glitching like a bad video feed. "Order is an illusion. Let's embrace the chaos." Deku hadn't bothered with a retort. Words were a luxury. With Black Whip, he'd been playing a desperate game of three-dimensional chess, anchoring civilians, pulling chunks of falling debris out of the air, and trying to create a cage around the constantly teleporting menace. He was running on fumes, the familiar ache of one for all thrumming a deep, resonant bass note through his entire being. The paranormal liberation war had forged him into something harder, faster, more efficient. But it had also scraped him raw, leaving his reserves shallower than they used to be. He'd finally seen his opening. Unravel, in a fit of pique, tore a particularly large rift open directly behind him, a swirling vortex of nauseating purple and yellow. He was poised to pull a nearby apartment complex into its maw. A family, a mother, a father, a little girl clutching a stuffed rabbit, was frozen in terror on their balcony, directly in the path of the unraveling. There was no time for a calculated plan. No time for a 45% smash. It was instinct. Pure, unadulterated heroism, the kind that had been beaten into him since the day he'd rushed toward the sludge villain. Using FA gene, he released the kinetic energy stored in his legs from a dozen frantic dodges. The resulting burst of speed was instantaneous, a cannon shot launch that left cracks in the asphalt. He didn't aim for the villain. He aimed through him. The impact was solid. Deku's armored shoulder connected with Unravel's sternum. The villain's surprised gasp was swallowed by the roar of the portal. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Deku shoved him backward, into the chaotic maw he had created. For a single, glorious second, it worked. The villain vanished into the vortex. The suction effect began to wane. The little girl on the balcony was safe. Then came the backlash. The portal, instead of closing, snapped taut like a rubber band and shot forward, collapsing in on itself. A tendril of raw, dimensional energy lashed out and wrapped around Deku's arm. It wasn't a physical grip. It was a fundamental one. It wasn't pulling his body. It was pulling his very location. His danger sense shrieked, a piercing mental siren that dwarfed any he had ever felt. His classmates' faces flashed through his mind, Uraraka's determined eyes, Ida's rigid salute, Kaken's explosive glare. All Might's booming, "You can become a hero!" Then, the world dissolved. He was pulled through the pinhole, the shriek of tearing reality being the last thing he heard before absolute silence. Pain was the anchor that dragged him back to consciousness. A sharp, grinding pain in his left shoulder, followed by a dull, throbbing symphony that encompassed his entire body. He was lying on something hard and damp, the smell of wet cardboard and refuse filling his nostrils. He groaned, pushing himself up with his good arm. His costume was a wreck. The fabric over his left shoulder was shredded, revealing a nasty, purple-hued dislocation. His mask was gone, and one of his iron saws was sparking intermittently. He was in an alleyway, grime-slick brick walls rising on either side of him. A single, bare bulb flickered weakly overhead, casting long, dancing shadows. Night. Where? He staggered to his feet, leaning against the cold brick for support. His mind felt like a shaken snow globe, thoughts and memories swirling in a confusing flurry. Muzidafu. Unravel. The portal. He was alive. That was a start. He must have been spat out somewhere else in the city. He stumbled toward the mouth of the alley, his boots crunching on unseen debris. The first thing he noticed was the silence. It wasn't the quiet of a sleeping city. It was a profound, unnatural stillness. No distant sirens. No rumble of late-night trains. No chatter of pedestrians or the hum of traffic. The air itself felt muted, sterile. It carried the clean, metallic scent of a hospital, not the rich, grimy perfume of a metropolis. He peered out onto the street. It was wide, pristine, and almost entirely empty. The architecture was sleek and futuristic, all soaring glass and polished steel, gleaming under the glow of streetlights that cast a pure, white radiance. There were cars, but they moved in perfect, synchronized lines, gliding along with a soft, electric hum. No horns. No aggressive lane changes. They flowed like data through a circuit. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air snaked its way down his spine. This wasn't Muzidafu. It wasn't even Japan. The signage was in English, the script bold and unfamiliar. Metropolis Municipal Transit, LexCorp. Tomorrow, today, his breath hitched. Metropolis. LexCorp. These weren't just names. They were legends. Icons from a bygone era, from the pre-Quark history books and the dusty comic books he had obsessed over as a child. The world where the first, greatest heroes had lived. It was a place of fiction, of myth. The portal, it didn't just move me in space. It moved me in something else. He needed a better view. Gritting his teeth against the searing pain in his shoulder, he channeled a tiny trickle of one for all into his legs and leaped, activating float just before he reached the apex. He rose silently into the air, a ghost in the unfamiliar night. From the rooftop, the sight was breathtaking and deeply, fundamentally wrong. The city sprawled before him, a jewel box of impossibly clean streets and towering skyscrapers. In the distance, a massive, golden globe sat atop a building, the words Daily Planet emblazoned on its equator. He could see it all, a landscape straight out of his most fervent childhood daydreams. But the dream was a fever dream. The perfect order was unnerving. There were no lights on in the residential towers, despite it being evening. The parks were empty, the benches gleaming under the moonlight untouched. It was a city holding its breath. A beautiful, perfect corpse. That's when his danger sense flared. It wasn't the usual sharp stab of imminent physical harm. It was a low, persistent thrum, a signal of a deep-seated wrongness. It was coming from the street below. He dropped into a crouch, peering over the ledge. A man was on his knees in the middle of the sidewalk, his shoulders shaking. He was sobbing, his cries shockingly loud in the oppressive silence. Before him, a pet carrier lay on its side, the door ajar and empty. Misty. The man wept, his voice cracking. She just darted out. I only took my eyes off her for a second. Before Deku could even process the scene, a streak of red lightning coalesced down the street. It resolved into a human form with a speed that made his own FA-Ging boosts feel sluggish. The flash. Deku's heart hammered against his ribs. It was him. The Scarlet Speedster, his suit a sleek, crimson marvel, the golden lightning bolt emblazoned on his chest. A real hero. Maybe he could help. Maybe he could explain what was happening. But the hero's posture was all wrong. He didn't approach the crying man with a comforting hand. He stopped a precise 10 feet away, his stance rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. Citizen, the Flash said, and his voice sent a fresh wave of ice through Deku's veins. It was a monotone, a perfectly modulated baritone devoid of any inflection or emotion. It sounded synthesized. You are in violation of Civic Code 7.4. Public emotional disturbance. The crying man looked up, his face a mask of confusion and grief. What? My cat, she's gone. Please, can you help me find her? You're so fast you could. Your personal loss is statistically irrelevant to the maintenance of societal harmony, the Flash interrupted, his head tilting a fraction of a degree. Your emotional outburst is a Class 3 inefficiency. It disrupts public order and encourages psychological instability in observers. Cease immediately. Deku felt sick. He pressed himself flatter against the rooftop, the rough concrete biting into his palms. This couldn't be happening. The Flash was a beacon of hope, a wisecracking, big-hearted hero. This was a robot wearing his face. Inefficiency? The man stammered, disbelief warring with his sorrow. I'm grieving. Are you telling me it's illegal to be sad? Correct, the Flash stated. Negative emotional states are precursors to illogical actions, which lead to crime and chaos. Under the perfect society protocol, such catalysts are prohibited. He took a step forward, his movements unnervingly fluid. You will submit to re-education. It is for your own good. It will restore your productivity. The man scrambled backward, pure terror now eclipsing his grief. No! Stay away from me. You're a monster. Your assessment is illogical, the Flash said, and then he moved. It wasn't a blur. It was a deletion. One frame, he was 10 feet away. The next, he was standing over the man, one hand gently but immovably placed on his shoulder. The man convulsed once, his eyes rolling back in his head as a subtle, electrical crackle surrounded him. He went limp. The Flash effortlessly lifted the unconscious man and spoke into his wrist. Unit 7, reporting. One instance of emotional deviancy neutralized. Subject contained for recalibration. Resuming patrol. A sleek, white drone descended silently from the sky, extending 2 mechanical arms to take the unconscious man. As it ascended, the Flash's head swiveled, his blank-lensed eyes sweeping the street, the buildings, the rooftops. Deku's danger sense screamed. He flattened himself completely, holding his breath, willing himself to be a part of the shadow. The hero's gaze passed over his position, lingered for a half-second, and then moved on. A moment later, with another crackle of static, the Flash was gone. Deku stayed there for a full 5 minutes, his body trembling uncontrollably. His mind refused to accept what his eyes had just seen. That wasn't a hero. That was a peacekeeper, an enforcer, a warden. Shakily, he rose and began to move, sticking to the shadows, a green phantom in a city of ghosts. He needed more information. He had to be wrong. This had to be a trick. A mass hallucination, an elaborate villain plot. He found a public information terminal, its screen glowing with the symbol of a stylized W inside a circle. He touched the screen. It came to life with a placid, female voice, as devoid of emotion as the Flash's. Welcome, citizen. How may the wardens assist you in maintaining a harmonious existence? The screen displayed a news feed. He tapped it. The lead story featured a face that was even more iconic, more deeply ingrained in his hero-worshipping soul than any other. Superman. But the headline was chilling. Warden Superman successfully negotiates final global sovereignty treaty. The world is now unified under the perfect society protocol. The accompanying footage was not of Superman saving a crashing plane or stopping a tidal wave. It was of him hovering, arms crossed, before the United Nations building. His face, the kindest face in fiction, was a cold, implacable mask. There was no smile. No warmth. Just unwavering, absolute authority. World leaders, their faces pale and drawn, signed a document as he watched. Another story scrolled by. Warden Green Lantern completes atmospheric filtration grid, eliminating 99.8% of airborne pollutants and unsanctioned signals. The videos showed Green Lantern, not creating fanciful dragons or giant fists, but weaving a web of perfect, emerald green geometric shapes across the stratosphere, his expression one of intense, dispassionate focus. The pieces clicked into place, each one a hammer blow to his heart. The Justice League. The greatest symbols of hope his world, and now this one, had ever known. They weren't just absent. They weren't just missing. They were the ones in charge. They were the architects of this silent, sterile, soulless world. They had sacrificed freedom for order, joy for placidity, humanity for efficiency. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just in another world. He was behind enemy lines. And the enemy was the very definition of unbeatable. A team of gods who had remade the world in their own terrifyingly perfect image. And he was utterly, completely alone. No All Might to guide him. No classmates to back him up. No government or pro-hero network to call for aid. He was a 16-year-old boy with a broken shoulder, a tattered costume, and a borrowed power, standing against a pantheon of fallen angels. He stumbled away from the terminal, a strangled sob caught in his throat. He ducked back into the labyrinth of alleyways, putting as much distance as he could between himself and the pristine, orderly streets. He finally collapsed in the sub-basement of a derelict building, the door long since rusted off its hinges. Darkness enveloped him. The only sound was the frantic pounding of his own heart, and the drip-drip-drip of water from a leaky pipe. The pain in his shoulder was a raging fire, but it was nothing compared to the cold, crushing despair that threatened to extinguish the spark of hope within him. He was lost. He was outmatched. The logical thing to do was hide, to try and survive, to somehow find a way home and forget this nightmare. But the image of the crying man being recalibrated burned in his mind. The hollow, terrified eyes of the world leaders signing away their freedom under Superman's cold gaze. The very concept of making sadness illegal. This wasn't justice. This wasn't peace. It was tyranny, wrapped in the capes of heroes. He fumbled inside a pouch on his utility belt. His fingers closed around something familiar. He pulled it out. It was his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 14. The cover was scorched, the pages warped and stiff from the dimensional transit and the grime of the alley. Half of it was probably unreadable, but it was there. A piece of home. A piece of him. He clicked his pen, the sound deafeningly loud in the cavernous basement. With his good hand, he opened to the first mostly clean page. His hand was shaking so badly his first few attempts to write were just jagged lines. He took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the tremors to subside. He had to think. He had to analyze. It was the only way he knew how to fight a problem that seemed too big to punch. His objective had been simple just hours ago: get home. Now, looking at the blank page under the faint moonlight filtering through a grate, a new, terrifying, and utterly necessary objective began to form. He wasn't a visitor here. He wasn't a castaway. As the only person in this world who knew what these heroes were supposed to be, he had a new responsibility. His pen scratched against the paper, the letters shaky but resolute. He didn't write about finding a way back. He didn't write about his injuries or his fear. He wrote a title at the top of the page: Fractured Pantheon Recovery Restoration Analysis. Underneath it he began a list. 1. The corruption. What is its nature? External control, mind control, parasite? Internal ideological shift? Is it reversible? 2. The wardens. Identify all active members. Analyze their new behavior patterns. Find discrepancies between their current actions and their known historical profiles. 3. Weaknesses, physical, psychological, ideological. Can their own twisted logic be used against them? 4. The world. Is there a resistance? Are there others who see this as wrong? Where would they hide? 5. My role. Incapacitate, not injure. Liberate, not defeat. How do you save someone you have to fight? He paused, looking at the last question. It hung in the air, heavy and seemingly impossible. A hot tear he didn't even realize he was crying dripped onto the page, smudging the ink. He wiped it away with the back of his dirty glove. He was alone. He was in pain. He was facing gods. But as he clutched the pen, the familiar weight of his analytical mind settling over his panic, Izuku Midoriya made a choice. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't hide. He would save them. Or he would die trying. In the suffocating silence of a world without heroes, a new one just got to work. The first 48 hours were a masterclass in misery. Izuku Midoriya, the inheritor of One for All, the boy who had faced down All for One, spent his time scrounging for discarded food and trying not to be seen. Every flinch of pain from his dislocated shoulder was a screaming reminder of his vulnerability. He found a secluded corner in the city's massive, eerily silent sewer system, a place the warden's pristine sanitation bots seemed to overlook, and performed a gruesome, necessary act. Gritting his teeth until his jaw ached, he slammed his back against a thick pipe junction, forcing his humerus back into its socket with a wet, sickening pop. The wave of white-hot agony that followed almost made him black out, but when the stars cleared from his vision, he could move his arm again, albeit with excruciating tenderness. Survival became a routine of stealth and observation. By day, he'd find a high, shadowed place, the underbelly of a bridge, a forgotten maintenance crawlspace, and watch the city. The citizens of Metropolis moved with a placid, unnerving grace. They walked in straight lines. They waited for crosswalk signals even when there were no cars for miles. Their faces were blank, peaceful masks. He saw a young couple have a mild disagreement on a park bench, their voices barely rising. Within 30 seconds, a drone descended, emitting a low, warbling hum. The couple's faces went slack, their argument forgotten. They stood, held hands, and walked away in perfect synchronization, their brief spark of passion extinguished. This was the perfect society protocol in action. It wasn't just about stopping crime. It was about preemptively excising any human behavior deemed a potential catalyst for it. Anger, grief, passionate debate, even boisterous laughter, all were inefficiencies to be smoothed over, recalibrated for the sake of a frictionless society. The wardens had created a world without conflict by creating a world without feeling. By night he scavenged. He learned the routes of the automated garbage disposal units, intercepting them to find sealed, untouched food packages discarded by restaurants for being a gram over or under their mandated weight. He never stole. The thought itself felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for, but finding sustenance in the perfectly curated waste of this oppressive utopia felt like a small act of rebellion. During one of these nocturnal excursions, he found a prize, a discarded tablet, its screen cracked but functional. He spirited it back to his sewer hideout. It had no power, but that was a problem he could solve. Concentrating, he channeled a minuscule, almost infinitesimal thread of one for all into his fingertip. He'd practiced this for years, learning to throttle the cataclysmic power into something delicate. With a touch that was more a prayer than a command, he sent a tiny spark of energy into the tablet's charging port. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen flickered to life. He had access. Sort of. The operating system was locked down, a walled garden called LeagueNet. There was no open browser, no access to old-world search engines. The news feeds were filled with glowing reports of the Warden's achievements. Warden Cyborg had optimized global logistics, eliminating hunger through perfect distribution, though it meant every human on Earth now ate the same nutrient paste. Warden Martian Manhunter had established a global telepathic wellness check, a passive scan that could detect deviant thoughts before they could become actions. It was a suffocating, inescapable web of control. There were no forums, no comment sections, no social media. No place for a dissenting voice to find purchase. As he scrolled through the sanitized propaganda, his hope began to fray. How could he fight this? It was a system so total, so absolute, that the very concept of resistance seemed impossible. He was about to toss the tablet into the sewer's sluggish flow when his thumb brushed a seemingly empty part of the screen. A flicker. A ghost of an icon that vanished as soon as it appeared. His heart leaped. He tapped the spot again, more deliberately this time. Nothing. He tried swiping, pinching, long pressing. Frustration mounted. Then, he remembered the patterns of his own world. The secret gestures, the hidden menus. He drew a pattern on the screen, a Z-shape, something a paranoid programmer might use. It worked. A hidden folder materialized, its icon a simple, black bat. Inside was a single, heavily encrypted text file named last_whispers.txt. His fingers trembled as he opened it. The text was fragmented, a jumble of data packets and corrupted sentences. It seemed to be the last will and testament of a failed resistance cell. They see everything, hear everything, John S. inside our heads. No place is safe. Metropolis is lost. Central City 2. The speedster is a caged warden. The Amazon enforces the silence, but the darkness holds. The old city. The sick city. Their light doesn't penetrate all the shadows there. Not yet. The bat's nest is too full of ghosts. If anyone finds this, go to Gotham. It's the last bastion of chaos. The only place with a soul left to save. The file ended with a corrupted map file and a string of code that looked like a decryption key. Gotham. The name struck Deku like a physical blow. Of course. In the pre-Quirk comics, if Metropolis was the city of tomorrow, the shining symbol of humanity's potential, Gotham was its dark, twisted reflection. It was the city of fear, of madness, of crime. But it was also the city of the Batman. The one hero who was just a man. The one who relied on his mind, his will, and his preparation above all else. Deku's own analytical mind, the very core of his being that he modeled after heroes like Batman, kicked into high gear. If any hero would have foreseen this, would have prepared for a scenario where his godlike allies went rogue, it would be him. The man who had contingency plans for everything. His objective, which had been a vague, desperate scrawl in his notebook, now had a focal point. He had to get to Gotham. The journey was a pilgrimage through a nightmare of perfect order. The 100 or so miles between Metropolis and Gotham were no longer a stretch of American wilderness. They were a managed resource. Automated agricultural drones tended to fields of genetically identical corn that stretched to the horizon, all under the sterile glare of 24-hour floodlights. The highways were rivers of silent, electric vehicles, policed by warden drones that moved with the predatory grace of hawks. There were no hitchhikers, no broken-down cars, no roadside diners. Just smooth, silent, relentless efficiency. For Izuku, it was the ultimate stealth mission. He traveled only under the deep cover of night, a green and black smudge against the landscape. He became a creature of the spaces in between. He used Black Whip to swing from the underpinnings of massive overpasses, the cars above gliding past, oblivious. He used Float to leap across open fields in long, silent bounds, his feet never touching the sensor-laden ground. His danger sense was his compass and his shield, a constant, low-grade hum that would spike sharply whenever a patrol drone veered too close, sending him diving for cover in an irrigation ditch or a dense patch of woods. He ate little, slept less. His focus was absolute. The fragmented map from the tablet, cross-referenced with pre-Quirk geographical data he managed to decrypt and download, was his guide. After 3 nights of grueling, nerve-shredding travel, the air began to change. The clean, sterile scent of Metropolis's countryside gave way to something older, heavier. The smell of damp stone, industrial decay, and old money. The gleaming, modern architecture softened, then hardened into something else. Dark, Gothic spires clawed at the night sky. Buildings were adorned not with sleek glass, but with grim, stone gargoyles. He had arrived at the edge of Gotham. From a ridge overlooking the city, he saw that it, too, had been pacified. But its pacification felt different. Where Metropolis was bright and clean, Gotham was dark and suppressed. The chaos had been paved over, but the grim foundations were still visible. It was a snarling beast in a muzzle. The gargoyles, he noted with a fresh chill, had been augmented. Their stone eyes now glowed with the faint red light of surveillance cameras. The deep shadows of the alleys, once home to muggers and worse, now flickered with the blue light of motion-detecting scanner grids. And then he saw it. High above the Gotham City Police Department headquarters, a powerful beam of light shot into the perpetually overcast sky. It wasn't a bat symbol. Not anymore. The wardens had twisted that too. Projected onto the low-hanging clouds was a massive, glowing clock face, its hands sweeping slowly forward. A digital display beneath it counted down. Curfew. 27:43, the bat signal. A call for help. A symbol of hope in the darkest of nights. Now, it was a warden's timepiece, a reminder to the inmates of their mandated bedtime. The perversion of it, the sheer, calculated cruelty of turning a symbol of defiance into a tool of oppression, made Deku's blood run cold. This wasn't just control. It was a deliberate, psychological breaking of the city's spirit. He descended into the city proper, a ghost flitting from one rooftop to the next. His destination was the one place Batman's legend always circled back to, Wayne Manor. According to the old stories, it sat on the outskirts of the city, a lonely sentinel overlooking the urban decay. He knew, from his obsessive childhood reading, that this was Batman's secret identity. If there were answers, they would be there. He found the estate easily. It was a sprawling Gothic mansion surrounded by a high, wrought iron fence. Just as the whispers had suggested, it was a place of ghosts. The grounds were immaculately kept, automated lawnmowers gliding silently across the vast lawns like metallic sheep. The hedges were perfectly trimmed, but the house itself was dark, every window a black, vacant eye. It was a mausoleum, preserved in perfect stasis. Getting past the fence was easy with Float. The grounds themselves were a different story. His danger sense hummed constantly, warning him of a web of subterranean sensors. He spent an hour observing, using his analytical mind to map the patrol patterns of the groundskeeping drones and the blind spots in the sensor grid. He couldn't risk the main house. It would be rigged with every alarm imaginable. But the Batcave, in the stories, it was a natural cavern system beneath the manor. There had to be another way in, a forgotten access point, a natural fissure. He moved to the cliffs at the back of the property, the ones that overlooked a small, dark river. He ran his hand along the rock face, his danger sense tingling. He was looking for anomalies, a hollow sound, a change in air pressure. He remembered a detail from the corrupted file, something about a decommissioned hydro intake. There, half hidden by overgrown ivy and years of neglect, was a massive, circular grate, sealed with rusted iron bolts the size of his fist. It was an old water intake tunnel, probably from a time before the city's modern plumbing, leading directly into the cave system. It had been sealed with a thick slab of concrete from the inside. This was it. It had to be. He took a deep breath, the cold, damp air filling his lungs. He planted his feet, digging his iron-soled boots into the soft earth. He felt the familiar, exhilarating power of one for all surge through him, a contained sun in his limbs. He focused it, letting it build, gathering the latent kinetic energy of his frantic journey with F.A. Jean. "Sorry about this, Bruce Wayne," he whispered to the ghost of the man he hoped to find. He drew his arm back. Green lightning crackled around him, illuminating the dark cliff face. "Delaware smash! 45%. His fist connected with the concrete seal. The sound was not an explosion, but a deep, resonant crack that seemed to shudder through the very bedrock. The concrete didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed, a fine mesh of fractures spreading from the point of impact. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a great, groaning sigh, the entire slab gave way, collapsing inward into the darkness beyond. A gust of stale, cold, and strangely clean air washed over him. It was the air of a place that had been sealed for a long, long time. Panting, his muscles screaming from the exertion on top of his accumulated exhaustion, he squeezed through the opening. He landed on a pile of concrete rubble in absolute blackness. He fumbled for a small penlight on his belt, its beam cutting a weak but steady path through the oppressive dark. The light revealed a massive, rough-hewn cavern. Water dripped from ancient stalactites, echoing in the vast space. He was in a natural cave, but a few yards ahead, the floor became smooth, polished concrete. He walked forward, his footsteps the only sound. His light caught something massive. He swept the beam upwards, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a dinosaur. An animatronic Tyrannosaurus Rex, frozen mid-roar, its skin a dull green in the gloom. A few feet away, leaning against the cavern wall, was a coin. A penny. A Lincoln penny the size of a small house. He was here. He was in the Batcave. A low, persistent hum guided him deeper. He followed it past rows of glass display cases, their contents shrouded in darkness. He could just make out the silhouettes of various batsuits, each one a different chapter in a legend. He saw a sleek, armored car parked on a raised platform, its silhouette like a predator at rest. The hum led him to the heart of the cave, a multi-tiered platform dominated by a gargantuan computer system. Most of the monitors were dark, but one was glowing with a soft, blue light, casting an ethereal glow on a high-backed chair that sat before it. Emergency backup power. The whole cave was running on it. It was a tomb, but a tomb with a still-beating heart. He approached the console, his awe warring with a gnawing dread. The single active screen displayed a simple text log. He leaned closer, his eyes scanning the words. It was a final entry, the timestamp dating it to nearly a year ago. The text was typed with a frantic, clipped urgency. Log entry 9471. Bruce Wayne. Signal of unknown origin detected by Watchtower Deep Space Array. High frequency, psychoactive. Non-terrestrial. It's bypassing all our firewalls. Exhibiting hive mind characteristics. It's targeting the heavy hitters first. I can feel it probing the network. It's looking for a nexus. A primary host. Diana is resisting. Hal is fighting it. But Clark, the signal is resonating with his Kryptonian physiology. It's targeting Clark. God help us, it's using him as the gateway. I need to activate protocol judgment. Isolate them. Contain them. Before it's too late. The signal is, it's in the walls. It's in the entry ended there. A final, blinking cursor pulsed at the end of the sentence, a silent testament to a hero's last stand. Deku stood there in the cold, silent heart of the Batcave, the light of the monitor reflecting in his wide, horrified eyes. His theory was no longer a theory. It was a fact. The Justice League hadn't fallen, they had been taken. They were puppets, controlled by an alien hive mind that had turned Superman himself into its beachhead, and Bruce Wayne knew. He was trying to stop it. He had a plan. A protocol. Judgment. The crushing weight of being alone lessened, replaced by something new. A sliver of terrifying, razor-sharp hope. He hadn't just found a hideout. He hadn't just found confirmation of his fears. He had found Batman's ghost. And with it, the key to the arsenal he would need to save them all. The Batcave was a cathedral of sorrowful genius. The air, thick with the scent of cold stone, ozone, and something indefinably old, seemed to press in on Izuku Midoriya, heavy with the weight of a legacy cut short. He stood before the Bat-computer, the final, desperate log entry of Bruce Wayne burning itself into his memory. The blinking cursor was a silent scream, a conversation abruptly ended. He knew. He was trying to stop it. He had a plan. That single thought was a lighthouse in the storm of Izuku's despair. He wasn't just a trespasser in a dead man's tomb. He was a successor, an inheritor of a final, desperate duty. He placed his hands on the console, the cool, metallic surface feeling strangely alive. "Computer," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper in the vast cavern. "Access protocol judgment." The computer's placid blue screen remained unchanged. A synthesized female voice, calm and impersonal, echoed from hidden speakers. Voice command not recognized. "Please state your query." Of course. It wouldn't be that simple. This was Batman. A man who layered paranoia like a painter layered oils. Deku's mind raced, sifting through everything he knew of the Dark Knight from the old stories. He wouldn't use a simple file name for his most dangerous secrets. He would use a key. A concept. He tried again. "Show me contingency plans." Justice League. Searching. 4,728 files found relating to Justice League and contingency. Please refine your search. Filter by threat level Omega. Searching. 312 files found. Please refine your search. It was a maze. A digital fortress designed to keep anyone, friend or foe, out. Deku leaned back, frustration gnawing at him. He looked around the cave, at the giant penny, a trophy from a villain called the Penny Plunderer. At the stoic, silent Tyrannosaurus Rex. At the glass case holding a tattered Robin costume, a silent, heartbreaking memorial. Every object told a story of triumph, of loss, of a relentless, obsessive crusade. Batman didn't think in terms of files and folders. He thought in terms of scenarios and consequences. Protocol judgment wasn't a file name. It was the name of the final act itself. The verdict. He had to speak the system's language. He took a deep breath and stood straight, trying to channel an authority he didn't feel. He looked directly at the main monitor, at the simple, glowing bat emblem that served as its screensaver. "Computer," he commanded, his voice ringing with newfound clarity. "On my authority. Execute verbal command, judgment." For a moment, there was only silence. The dripping of water from the stalactites seemed to count the seconds. Then, a profound shift occurred. The hum of the backup generators deepened. The single blue monitor went dark. Every screen on the massive console array flashed to life in a blood-red glare, bathing the cavern in a hellish light. The calm female voice was replaced by a new one, a deep, gravelly baritone that was instantly recognizable. It was Batman's voice, recorded, processed, and utterly chilling. Protocol judgment activated. Welcome, Executor. On the central screen, a series of files appeared, each marked with a symbol. A stylized S. A double W. A lantern. A lightning bolt. Show me. Superman, Deku whispered, his mouth dry. A holographic projector in the center of the console whirred to life, creating a three-dimensional, rotating image of the Man of Steel. Text, diagrams, and chemical formulas swirled around the hologram. Batman's voice began a clinical, detached narration. Subject, Superman. Kal-El of Krypton. Threat, potentially world-ending. Primary method of control is ideological, not physical. However, should physical subjugation be necessary, multiple options are available. The hologram shifted, showing a simulation of Earth's sun turning a sickly red. Primary solution, red sun radiation. Emitters based on Brainiac's technology, deployable via orbital satellite, can saturate a target area, nullifying Kryptonian abilities. Subject will be reduced to human-level strength, but retain his tactical knowledge. He will still be dangerous. Another diagram appeared, a jagged green crystal. Secondary solution, kryptonite. A blunt instrument. Effective but crude. Multiple variants exist in storage. Standard green for incapacitation, red for unpredictable mutations, gold to permanently strip powers. Black kryptonite, capable of splitting a Kryptonian into two separate beings, is secured in sublevel 4. Use only as a final, desperate measure. The hologram of Superman clutched his head. Psychological warfare. Exploit his Messiah complex. Create an unwinnable scenario. Force him to choose between two catastrophic events, proving his inability to save everyone. Undermine his belief in his own symbolism. This is more effective for long-term neutralization than any radiation. Deku felt a profound sickness roil in his gut. This wasn't a contingency plan. It was a character assassination, a step-by-step guide to dismantling a god, body and soul. He moved to the next file. Wonder Woman. Subject, Wonder Woman. Diana of Themyscira. Threat, unrivaled combatant. Her weakness is not physical, but philosophical. The hologram showed Diana, deflecting bullets with her bracelets. Physical solution, a custom synthesized neurotoxin delivered via aerosol can induce extreme vertigo. Her reliance on perfect balance and form is a critical vulnerability. Disrupt her connection to her warrior's grace, and she becomes beatable. The simulation shifted. Diana was shown in an empty white room, her eyes wide. Psychological warfare. The lasso of Hestia compels truth, but it cannot create it. Trap her in a looping paradox where any action, however noble, results in a perceived failure. Her greatest weapon is her compassion. Turn it into a cage. A sophisticated virtual reality projection, undetectable by her senses, can simulate the suffering of innocence in response to her every move until her will breaks. He couldn't take any more of the narration. He muted Batman's chilling voice and navigated the files with trembling hands. Green Lantern, a plan to bombard him with a specific wavelength of yellow light, the color of fear, while simultaneously using sonic emitters to broadcast the cacophony of his greatest failures, overloading his concentration and causing his ring to sputter and fail. Aquaman, a simple, brutal plan involving a chemical compound that would rapidly and agonizingly dehydrate him on contact, exploiting his Atlantean physiology. And finally, the Flash. Deku opened the file, his heart pounding. This was his first target. His first test. Subject: the Flash. Barry Allen. Threat: capable of altering time and space. The most dangerous potential reality breaker. The file was more complex than the others. His speed is his greatest weapon and his greatest weakness. His body is in a constant state of molecular vibration, allowing him to phase through solid objects. This state is unstable. A complex diagram of a human nervous system, glowing with the energy of the speed force, appeared. Solution: create a wide-field vibrational disruption. A device emitting a specific, chaotic frequency will force an uncontrolled dephasing. If caught mid-phase, the result is catastrophic. The simulation showed the holographic Flash vibrating through a wall, only to have the wall flash with energy. The hologram screamed and exploded in a shower of light. It's the equivalent of hitting a brick wall at the speed of light from every direction at once. Molecular cohesion would fail instantaneously, the file continued. Secondary approach, hypermetabolism. His body is a furnace, a fast-acting, custom neurotoxin, delivered via an airborne vector he would inhale before he could react, could trigger a full system shutdown in less than 0.2 seconds. Deku stumbled back from the console. His hand clapped over his mouth, bow rising in his throat. He leaned against the cool metal of a display case, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This was horrifying. It was the work of a brilliant, paranoid, and utterly ruthless mind. Each plan was a masterpiece of tactical cruelty, designed not just to stop, but to break, to utterly demolish these heroes, exploiting their deepest fears and most fundamental weaknesses. It was the cold, hard calculus of a man who had stared into the abyss of godlike power, and decided the only response was to build an even darker abyss. For a moment, Deku was tempted. The path was laid out before him. A brutal, effective, and guaranteed way to stop the Wardens. He had the schematics, the chemical formulas, the psychological roadmaps. He could do it. He could win. But what would he become? He looked at his own hands, still scraped and bruised. He thought of All Might, passing a sacred torch to him, a power built on sacrifice and hope. He thought of his own creed, the desperate, crying need to save everyone he could. These plans, they weren't about saving. They were about execution. He pushed himself off the display case, his expression hardening with a new resolve. No. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't become this. The horror in his heart began to recede, replaced by the familiar, thrumming hum of analysis. He looked back at the screen, not with fear, but with the sharp, focused gaze of a strategist finding a new angle. Batman's plans were brutal, yes. But the science was sound. The analysis of their weaknesses was flawless. The how was brilliant. It was the why that was wrong. The intent. Deku's goal wasn't to destroy the Justice League. It was to free them. To reach the heroes trapped inside the Wardens. He couldn't use a bomb to make the Flash explode. But the phase disruption frequency, could it be modified? Not to destroy but to stun? To hold him in place for a fraction of a second? Long enough to do something else? Long enough to tag him, to get a reading, to inject a diagnostic tool that could tell him what this brainiac signal was and how to fight it. He could use the method but change the outcome. He could turn Batman's daggers into scalpels. A fire ignited in his chest, a fierce, burning determination that pushed back the exhaustion and the pain. He had his mission. He had his tools. Now, he needed his arsenal. He turned away from the Bat computer and began to explore the cave in earnest. The place was a monument to one man's war on crime. An armory held dozens of non-lethal weapons, high-tensile capture foam launchers, electrified batarangs, cryogenic pellets. A chemistry lab, complete with a state-of-the-art mass spectrometer, held samples of every toxin known to man, and hundreds that weren't. And then he found it. The workshop. It was dominated by a machine that looked like a cross between a mechanic's lift and a high-tech 3D printer. A plaque on its side read, Wayne Kelvin Advanced Fabrication Unit. Model 7. It hummed with latent power, even on the emergency grid. Deku's eyes widened. This wasn't just a printer. Based on the surrounding schematics, it could manipulate materials on an atomic level. It could forge custom alloys, weave carbon fiber composites, and print complex microcircuitry in minutes. It was a factory in a box. With this, he could make anything. He spent the next several hours in a blur of focused activity. First, he stripped off the tattered remains of his gamma costume. He placed it carefully on a workbench, his fingers tracing the familiar lines. It had served him well. Using the fabricator's delicate manipulators and referencing his own design notes, he began to repair it. He reinforced the airmite weave, patched the holes, and recalibrated the mechanisms for his Air Force gloves. But he didn't stop there. He began to integrate. He started with the belt. He discarded his own worn, simple pouches for a dark gray, multi-segmented utility belt, its design lifted straight from one of Batman's schematics. It was heavier, more functional, with quick-release magnetic clasps and compartments of varying sizes. Into these he began to place his new tools, all built with the fabricator. He created a series of small, disc-shaped devices. Some were designed to release a sudden, intense burst of cryogenic gas, inspired by Mr. Freeze's technology but miniaturized. Others were EMP charges, calibrated to disable the Warden drones. And a third set were high-frequency sonic emitters, designed to disorient. Next, his gauntlets. He kept his own Air Force gloves for their primary function, but he augmented them heavily. Over the back of his hands and forearms, he fabricated and attached articulated plating of a matte black composite. These weren't just for protection. Embedded in the right gauntlet was a spring-loaded injector system, designed to deliver a payload with a simple touch. In the left, he integrated a powerful sonic generator, its frequency tunable via a dial on his wrist. Finally, his mask. His old, tattered mask with its long ears and wide, cheerful grin felt like a relic from a different lifetime. He needed something more. He fabricated a new cowl that integrated with the metal respirator he already wore. The ears were shorter, more functional, housing broadband communication receivers. But the most important upgrade was the visor. He replaced the simple eye slits with polarized, multi-layered lenses. A flick of a switch on his temple, and the world would resolve into a stream of data. The lenses could analyze energy signatures, provide thermal imaging, and link directly to the Batcomputer's database, feeding him tactical information in real time. He stood before a polished sheet of metal he'd found, examining his reflection. He was still recognizably Deku. The green and black color scheme, the iconic silhouette, the red boots, it was all there. But it was augmented, hardened. The dark gray of the utility belt, the stark black of the new gauntlets and cowl elements, the cold, analytical glow of the lenses. It was as if the shadow of the bat had fallen over him. He was a fusion. The unbreakable heroic spirit of Izuku Midoriya, now armed with the cold, pragmatic arsenal of Batman. He was no longer just a boy in a costume. He was an insurgency of one. With his new suit on, he returned to the Batcomputer. The red glare of the Judgment Protocol still filled the cave. He pulled up the file on the flash again, this time copying the schematics for the phase disruption device. He fed the data into the fabricator's console, but with his own critical modifications. He removed the explosive payload entirely. He shrunk the device down to the size of his palm. He recalibrated the vibrational frequency, tuning it not for destruction, but for a momentary, targeted stun, a force resolidification that would last, according to his calculations, no more than 0.8 seconds. Finally, he connected its power source to the injector mechanism in his new gauntlet. The plan was solidifying. Bait the Flash. Lure him into a contained area. Use Blackwhip to create a complex trap. Force him to phase through it. At the critical moment, activate the wide field emitter to stun him. Use FA gene to close the distance in that sub-second window, and slap the diagnostic tag onto his suit. He spent another hour in the fabricator, creating the tag itself. It was a marvel of miniaturization, a self-cloaking device containing a microscopic diagnostic probe. Once injected, the nanites would bond with Barry Allen's nervous system, piggybacking on the speed force energy flowing through him. They wouldn't harm him. They would simply observe, analyze the parasitic Brainiac signal, and transmit the data back to the Batcave. When he was finished, he held the small, metallic device in his palm. It was his first real weapon in this war. A weapon of information. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak on his shoulders. His body ached. His mind was frayed from days of fear and hours of intense concentration. But as he looked at the device, at his reflection in its polished surface, he felt a calm he hadn't felt since he arrived in this broken world. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was no longer in charge. Purpose was. He clipped the emitter to his belt and performed a final systems check. The visor flickered to life, data scrolling past his vision. The gauntlets hummed with readiness. He felt the familiar power of one for all thrumming beneath his skin, a patient giant waiting for its call. He walked to the entrance he had made, the pile of rubble a stark reminder of his violent arrival. He looked back one last time at the darkened Batcave, at the red glow of the computer, a silent, grim testament to a fallen guardian. The ghost's arsenal was now in the hands of a hero. The tools of darkness would be used to bring back the light. He squeezed through the opening and stepped out into the Gotham night. The air was cold and smelled of rain. Above, the warden's clock-face bat signal continued its inexorable countdown. The city was a prison, and its wardens were the fastest, strongest beings alive. Deku activated his new visor. A tactical map of the city overlaid his vision, patrol routes of drones highlighted in red. He plotted a course, a silent, efficient path toward the nearest transit station that could take him to Central City. His first target was waiting. He was no longer the lost boy who had crashed into an alien metropolis. He was a weapon, forged in the fires of one world and honed in the shadows of another. And he was ready to fight. Central City was Metropolis's energetic twin. Where Metropolis was stately and grand, Central City was a vibrant buzz of motion, even under the warden's oppressive peace. The architecture was dynamic, full of sweeping curves and bold angles, designed to evoke a sense of speed. But like its sister city, the lifeblood had been drained from it. The people moved with the same placid obedience, their faces smooth and untroubled. The only thing that moved with any real velocity was the Flash himself, a crimson wraith enforcing the tranquil monotony. Izuku Midoriya arrived not as a hero, but as an saboteur. He spent a full day in the city, moving through its underbelly, service tunnels, abandoned subway lines, the hollow spaces between buildings. He was a ghost in the machine, his new cowl lenses filtering the world into a constant stream of data. He observed patrol patterns, mapped drone coverage, and most importantly, searched for the perfect battlefield. He found it in the city's old industrial district. A massive, decommissioned turbine hall, scheduled for civic reclamation, stood silent and cavernous. It was a multi-story metal labyrinth of gantries, catwalks, rusted machinery, and enormous, stationary turbines. It was enclosed, complex, and blessedly free of civilian presence. It was a cage waiting for its occupant. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. He couldn't outrun the Flash. He couldn't outreact him. Therefore, the fight couldn't be a fight. It had to be a meticulously executed trap, where every move the Flash made was one Deku had already anticipated and planned for. The unstoppable force had to be lured into a collision with an object so immovable it was woven from logic and prediction itself. The bait had to be something the Flash, or rather, the cold, logical warden controlling him, could not ignore. It couldn't be a simple crime, that was too crude. It had to be an anomaly, a glitch in the perfect system. A violation of the laws of physics as the wardens understood them. Working in the shadowy depths of the turbine hall, Deku assembled his lure. Using a portable version of the Batcave's fabricator, a marvel of miniaturization he'd brought with him, he constructed a small, intricate device. It was a Mobius strip of polished metal, floating in a contained magnetic field. At its heart was a shard of stabilized temporal energy, a byproduct of one of Batman's more esoteric experiments he'd found documented in the Judgment Files. The device did nothing, practically, but it broadcasted a subtle, localized distortion in causality. It was, in the simplest terms, a probability anomaly. To a being like the corrupted Flash, obsessed with order and predictable outcomes, it would be like a screeching alarm in a library. He placed the device in the exact center of the hall's main floor and activated it. A soft, shimmering haze enveloped the floating Mobius strip. Then, Deku retreated into the rafters, his work just beginning. For the next hour, he became a spider. He unspooled reel after reel of a specialized filament from his utility belt, a carbon nanotube weave, nearly invisible and stronger than steel. He wove it throughout the massive chamber, anchoring it to girders, turbines, and catwalks. It wasn't a simple web. It was a three-dimensional matrix, a complex, multi-layered lattice of intersecting lines. Some strands were taut, others were left with calculated slack. It was a physical representation of a predictive algorithm, each strand a plotted trajectory. He was turning the entire hall into the firing chamber of a custom-built weapon. When he was finished, he stood on a high gantry, overlooking his handiwork. The air in the hall shimmered with the barely visible lines. He clipped the phase disruption emitter to a central support beam, aiming it down at the kill box he had created. He ran a nearly invisible trigger wire from the emitter to his position. He took a deep breath, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The stage was set. The trap was laid. All he had to do was wait. He didn't have to wait long. His danger sense flared, a sharp, piercing needle of pure speed. It wasn't approaching, it was simply there. A crackle of red lightning, a sizzle of displaced air, and the flash stood before the probability device. The hero's stance was rigid, his head cocked at an analytical angle. His blank white eye lenses stared at the shimmering Mobius strip. For a full 5 seconds he didn't move, his internal processors likely struggling to categorize the impossibility before him. Unidentified temporal-spatial anomaly detected, the Flash's monotone voice echoed in the cavernous hall, devoid of curiosity, only cold analysis. Source of systemic inefficiency located. Commencing neutralization protocol. He reached for the device. That was Deku's cue. From his perch, Deku fired a single, non-lethal pellet from a custom wrist launcher. It wasn't aimed at the Flash. It struck the ground a few feet to his left, shattering on impact and releasing a small cloud of inert, phosphorescent dust. The reaction was instantaneous. The Flash's head snapped up. His internal sensors had registered an unsanctioned projectile. An attack. His posture shifted from analytical to aggressive. Unidentified hostile entity detected, he announced. His entire body began to vibrate, a low hum filling the air as he prepared to move. "You're not going to recalibrate me," Deku called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline roaring in his ears. He needed to keep him engaged, to force him into the patterns he'd predicted. The Flash's lenses locked onto Deku's position high on the gantry. "Your existence is an error. Errors must be corrected." And then he was gone. The world dissolved into a series of still frames. Deku's danger sense was a constant, screaming siren in his skull, giving him a precious microsecond of warning before each impact. This wasn't a fight. It was a storm. A crimson blur appeared before him. Deku, already in motion, threw himself backward. The fist that would have shattered his skull passed through the space where his head had been, the wind from its passage roaring in his ears. He landed on a lower catwalk, rolling to absorb the impact. The Flash was there to meet him, appearing at the other end of the narrow walkway. He didn't run. He was simply present. Deku immediately fired a line of Black Whip, not at the Flash, but at a girder above, swinging himself away as the catwalk beneath his feet was torn to shreds by 1,000 lightning-fast punches, the metal screaming as it was reduced to confetti. He was a leaf in a hurricane, his every move a desperate reaction. But it was a calculated desperation. He wasn't trying to land a hit. He was hurting. He landed on the side of one of the massive, stationary turbines, his boots clinging to the curved metal surface. The Flash appeared on the turbine opposite him. "Your movements are inefficient," the warden stated. "Your probability of escape is 0.001%. Surrender and accept recalibration." "I'd rather not, thanks." Deku grunted, kicking off the turbine and using a short burst from float to arc through the air. He was guiding the Flash deeper into the latticework of nearly invisible filaments. He could see the speedster's movements now, not as a continuous blur, but as a series of lightning-fast calculations. He would appear, assess, and attack. And each time, Deku was already moving, his danger sense and his analytical predictions giving him the barest fraction of a second to evade. He was leading him on a deadly, three-dimensional dance. The Flash grew impatient. The cold logic of the Brainiac program registered Deku's evasions as an unacceptable deviation from the expected outcome. His tactics changed. Instead of appearing and striking, he began to move in a continuous, high-speed circuit around the chamber, a ribbon of red light that sought to encircle and overwhelm his target. This was it. The moment Deku had been waiting for. The Flash was now a blur, ricocheting off walls and machinery at angles that defied geometry. He was moving too fast to perceive the nearly invisible threads. He wasn't running through the trap. He was becoming a part of it, his kinetic energy causing the entire web to vibrate, to thrum like a plucked string instrument. Deku landed on the central platform, the trigger wire for the phase disruptor clutched in his hand. He was the eye of the storm. The red blur circled him, tightening its orbit, the hum of its passage rising to a piercing whine. "Now!" Deku yelled to himself, pulling the trigger wire. The emitter on the ceiling flashed once, unleashing a silent, invisible wave of chaotic energy that saturated the entire chamber. For the Flash, it was as if the universe turned to glue. He had been moving at a speed approaching light, his body vibrating at a precise frequency to allow him to phase through any obstacle, including the microfilaments of Deku's web. When the wave hit, that precise frequency was shattered. His control over his own molecular state vanished. He was forcibly, violently, slammed back into a solid state. He was mid-stride, passing through a dense intersection of a dozen carbon nanotube filaments. The result was not an explosion, as Batman's file had predicted for a lethal dose. Deku's modified frequency was a stun, not a kill shot. But the effect was still catastrophic. The unstoppable force met the immovable object. The Flash let out a choked, inhuman cry as the hypertensile wires, now as solid to him as tungsten steel, bit into his body. He was thrown from his trajectory, tangled in the web like a fly, his momentum dispersed in a brutal, full-body impact. The red of his suit was instantly scored with black lines where the filaments had cut into the armored fabric. He hung suspended 20 feet in the air, wrapped in a cage of his own making, convulsing as his body fought to regain control. The stun would only last for a fraction of a second. Deku had 0.8 seconds. He didn't waste a nanosecond. He released the kinetic energy he'd been storing from every desperate dodge, every frantic leap. The power exploded from his legs, launching him from the platform like a projectile. He wasn't just moving fast. He was a guided missile, his trajectory calculated to intercept the suspended, struggling speedster. The world seemed to slow down. He could see the panicked, confused light in the Flash's lenses, the Brainiac program struggling to process the sudden, total loss of motor function. He could see the sparks of speed force energy arcing uncontrollably from his body. Deku rocketed upward. His right arm, the gauntlet with the injector mechanism primed and ready, was cocked back. He wasn't aiming to punch. He wasn't aiming to harm. He reached the Flash. With a movement that was shockingly gentle compared to the violence that preceded it, he slapped his open palm against the lightning bolt emblem on the Flash's chest. Click! The injector fired, its payload of diagnostic nanites delivered directly into the material of the suit, where it would penetrate to the skin beneath. At the same time, the device itself, the small tag, magnetically clamped onto the suit's interior lining and activated its cloaking field. 0.7 seconds had passed. Deku used the last of his momentum to kick off the Flash's chest, twisting in midair and firing a strand of black whip to a high girder to arrest his movement. The 0.8 seconds were up. The Flash's body regained control. With a roar of pure rage and confusion, the speed force exploded from him. The carbon nanotube web, strong as it was, vaporized, its strands sublimating into dust under the sheer energy output. The Flash dropped to the floor, landing in a crouch. He was no longer a calm, logical warden. He was a caged, furious animal. The cold logic had been momentarily overridden by a primal, confused fury. He looked at his suit, at the score marks. He looked up at Deku, who now stood on a gantry far above. Protocol violated, the Flash snarled, his voice a distorted, angry version of the monotone. System error. You are a virus. You will be erased. He vanished. Not to attack, but to retreat. The Brainiac program, having encountered an unsolvable problem and sustained minor damage, was pulling its asset back for analysis. A flicker of red lightning, a gust of wind that kicked up a storm of dust, and the turbine hall was silent once more. Deku hung from his black whip strand, his entire body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. He could feel a dozen new bruises forming from the violent evasions. But he was alive, and he had won. He deactivated his visor, the tactical data vanishing, leaving him in the dim, dusty light of the hall. He lowered himself to the ground, his legs shaking so badly he had to lean against the turbine for support. He pulled a small, handheld monitor from his utility belt, a remote receiver linked to the Bat computer. He powered it on. For a few agonizing seconds there was only static. Then, a line of text appeared. Incoming transmission. Nanite probe online. Acquiring biometric data. Subject B. Allen. A new window opened, a stream of complex biological and energetic data scrolling rapidly down the screen. Heart rate, neural activity, metabolic rate. And among it all, a foreign signal, a parasitic data stream, woven into the very fabric of Barry Allen's neural architecture like a digital tumor. It pulsed with a sickly green light on the monitor, a clear, undeniable presence. Deku stared at the screen, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his weary face. It was there. Proof. The corruption was a tangible thing, a signal he could now analyze, map, and hopefully, counteract. He hadn't just defeated a god, he'd drawn its blood. He had a key, but his victory had come at a cost. The monitor beeped, a new priority alert flashing in red. Warning, Warden Global Network Alert. Hostile Anomaly, Designation, DKU, raised to Alpha Level Threat. All available assets being retasked. Multiple wardens now converging on your location. His smile faded. He had poked the hornet's nest. And now the whole swarm was coming for him. He had won the battle, but he had just officially declared war, and the silent, perfect world of the wardens would now turn its full, terrifying attention to the single, illogical boy who dared to defy it. The victory tasted like ash and blood. Izuku Midoriya didn't have the luxury of savoring his success. He was prey. His triumph over the Flash hadn't earned him a reprieve. It had painted a colossal target on his back. The moment the Crimson Speedster vanished, the entire city of Gotham, his supposed sanctuary, transformed from a shadowy hiding place into a well-lit prison yard. He scrambled back through the darkened veins of the city, every muscle screaming in protest. The fight with the Flash had been a razor-thin gambit of prediction and timing, but the physical toll of his high-speed evasions was catching up to him. Deep, throbbing bruises were blooming across his ribs and back. His reserves of one for all were perilously low, the familiar, comforting hum of power now a faint, weary whisper. Back in the cold, silent dampness of the Batcave, he didn't rest. He limped to the Bat computer, the data from the new diagnostic tag already streaming in from the remote monitor he carried. The crimson glare of the Judgment Protocol washed over him as he plugged the device into the main console. The screen filled with data, a torrent of information that confirmed his worst fears. The parasitic signal wasn't just in Barry Allen. It was a part of him, a master program running his entire biological and neurological system. It regulated his heartbeat, processed his thoughts, and commanded the very speed force that was his birthright. And as Deku cross-referenced it with the initial energy readings Bruce Wayne had captured, a horrifying truth emerged. The signal was a perfect match. It was a universal virus, a single consciousness puppeteering the entire Justice League. Saving one wouldn't be enough. He had to save them all. He was so engrossed in the data, tracing the tendrils of the Brainiac's signal through a holographic representation of a human nervous system, that he almost missed the alert. It wasn't a loud alarm, but a quiet, insistent chime from the Bat computer. Batman's voice, cold and automated, cut through the cavern. Warning. High-energy signature detected entering Earth's atmosphere. Trajectory, Gotham City. Signature consistent with a standard Green Lantern power ring. A knot of ice formed in Deku's stomach. They weren't sending another scout. They were sending artillery. Warning, the voice continued, a second alert chiming in. Anomalous seismic and sonar activity detected in Gotham Harbor. Non-terrestrial biological signature, classification, Atlantean. Rate of approach, 80 knots. It was a pincer movement. Air and sea. The hive mind was learning. It had analyzed his victory over the Flash. A victory won through environmental control and exploiting a single target's weakness in an enclosed space. The response was brutally logical. Attack him from two vectors simultaneously, one with limitless range and the other with overwhelming terrestrial power. No more enclosed spaces. The entire city was now the battlefield. Deku's mind raced, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of imminent danger. Green Lantern and Aquaman. The Emerald Will and the King of the Seven Seas. He pulled up their respective judgment files, his eyes scanning the brutal protocols. For Green Lantern, Batman's plan was cruel and psychological. The ring is powered by will. Overwhelm the user's concentration. The constructs are only as strong as the mind that builds them. For Aquaman, the plan was simpler, more primal. Atlantean physiology requires hydration. Dehydration induces rapid systemic failure. He couldn't fight them both at once. It was impossible. He had to separate them, distract one while dealing with the other. The plan that formed in his mind was desperate, ugly, and carried a heavy moral cost. But he had no other choice. He ran to the workshop, his boots echoing in the vast cave. He grabbed a series of small, spherical drones from a charging station, Batman's Echo drones, designed for surveillance and holographic projection. He frantically programmed them, uploading audio files and images from the Batcomputer's extensive database on Hal Jordan. Files that should never be used as weapons. As he worked, a new sound began to permeate the cave. A low, resonant hum that vibrated through the stone floor. It was the ring, announcing its presence. He was running out of time. He launched the drones through the collapsed tunnel entrance, controlling them with a datapad strapped to his forearm. Then, with a deep breath, he raced toward the surface. He had to draw them to the right place. The moment he emerged into the Gotham night, he saw it. A vast, shimmering green dome was descending over the city, its edges perfectly sealing the island from the outside world. It wasn't a chaotic blast of power. It was a work of chilling, geometric perfection. A cage. Below it, hovering in the sky like a malevolent angel, was Green Lantern. His posture was rigid, his face a mask of cold concentration. The green light of his ring cast an unholy glow on his features. He wasn't a man. He was the focal point of an immense, perfectly controlled power. Anomaly designated Deku, Green Lantern's voice boomed, amplified by the ring. It was the same synthesized monotone as the Flash's. Your chaotic existence disrupts the harmony of the protocol. You are an error in the system. By the will of the Wardens, you will be deleted. A beam of brilliant green energy, thick as a skyscraper, lanced down from the sky. It wasn't aimed at Deku. It was aimed in front of him, carving a deep, glowing trench in the street and forcing him back. It was a warning shot. A herding tactic. Deku didn't run. He stood his ground on a rooftop overlooking Gotham's industrial district, his new cowl lenses glowing faintly. "Is this what you call harmony, Hal Jordan?" he shouted into the wind, his voice small against the hum of the ring. "Living in a cage? Is this the future your will is building? The future is order. The future is peace. Your concepts of freedom are archaic variables of chaos," the warden responded, raising his hand to fire again. "Then what about this?" Deku said, tapping a command into his datapad. "Is this order?" The Echo drones, cloaked and positioned around Green Lantern, sprang to life. They didn't attack. They projected. Suddenly, the air around the corrupted hero shimmered. A holographic image of a woman with flowing brown hair and fierce, intelligent eyes appeared before him, her face a mask of terror. Carol Ferris. "Hal! What are you doing?" the hologram cried, her voice a perfect replica. "This isn't you. Fight it." The green beam wavered. The perfect, solid line of energy flickered for a nanosecond. On the ground, Deku saw it. A crack in the facade. The Brainiac program fought back. "Irrelevant data," Green Lantern stated, his voice strained. He tried to dismiss the image, but another drone activated, projecting a new scene. The smoldering wreckage of a Ferris aircraft test plane. Then came the sound. Deku had hesitated to use it. It felt like a violation. But survival demanded it. He triggered the audio file. The sound of screeching, tearing metal filled the air, a high-fidelity recording of a catastrophic engine failure. It was followed by the panicked voice of a pilot, a voice Hal Jordan knew better than his own, the voice of his father. "Mayday, mayday. I've lost control. Tell my boys I..." The transmission cut to static, the same way it had all those years ago. This time, the effect was profound. A strangled gasp escaped Green Lantern's lips. The massive energy cage flickered violently, turning translucent for a full second. The beam he was charging dissolved into a shower of green sparks. The cold, logical warden was at war with the terrified, grieving son trapped inside. His concentration, the very fuel of his power, was shattering. His constructs began to lose their integrity. A solid green wall developed cracks, a giant fist lost its fingers, a shield wavered like a heat haze. It was the opening Deku needed. But his victory in the air was punctuated by a new threat from the ground. A colossal wave erupted from Gotham Harbor, surging over the seawall and crashing into the street below. It wasn't a natural wave, it was controlled, directed. Riding its crest was a figure of raw, majestic power. Aquaman. He landed on the street with the force of a meteor, the asphalt cracking under his bare feet. Water swirled around him, obeying his every command. He held his golden trident, its tips gleaming with deadly intent. Unlike the other wardens, there was no cold stillness to him. He was a king, a force of nature. And his expression was one of regal, utter fury. You have disrupted the balance, Aquaman's voice thundered, deeper and more resonant than the others, carrying the weight of the ocean in its depths. The surface world is finally at peace, and you, land dweller, bring your chaos to my shores. You will answer to the sea. With Green Lantern still struggling against his psychological demons, Aquaman charged. He wasn't a blur like the Flash. He was a freight train. He bounded across the street, covering 50 yards in a single leap, his trident aimed directly at Deku's heart. Deku met the charge head-on. Not with strength, but with agility. He used Fa Gene to launch himself over the charging king, firing a strand of black whip that wrapped around the trident. He pulled, trying to disarm him. It was like trying to pull a mountain. Aquaman didn't even slow, simply yanking the trident and pulling Deku through the air toward him. Deku released the whip just in time, twisting his body to avoid being impaled. He crashed through the window of a derelict warehouse, shards of glass raining down around him. He landed, rolling across the dusty floor, his ribs screaming in protest. He was in a chemical processing plant, long since abandoned. The air was thick with the smell of rust and acrid chemicals. Pipes, stained with age and leakage, crisscrossed the cavernous space. Massive, empty vats stood like silent, rusted sentinels. It was perfect. It was exactly where he needed to be. Aquaman burst through the wall, not even bothering with the window. Brick and mortar exploded inward. He stood there, framed by the gaping hole, water from the street still dripping from his hair. He was a primal god of wrath. There is nowhere to run, he growled. The fight was brutal, immediate, and utterly one-sided. Deku was a gnat buzzing around a lion. He used the environment, ducking behind vats, swinging from pipes with black whip. He unleashed a 45% smash, the blow connecting squarely with Aquaman's chest. It would have sent any of his world's villains flying through a wall. Aquaman barely slid back a foot, his expression unchanging. Your strength is pitiful, he said, and swung his trident. The weapon moved in a golden arc, impossibly fast. Deku dodged, but the haft of the trident caught him in the side, lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing into a network of rusted pipes. The impact was agony. He felt his ribs crack. His vision swam with black spots. He gasped for air, the coppery taste of blood filling his mouth. Aquaman was on him in an instant, his massive hand grabbing Deku by the throat and slamming him against a large chemical vat. The metal groaned under the impact. The sea is patient, Aquaman said, his grip tightening like a vice. Deku's vision started to tunnel. But my patience has its limits. This ends now. Deku's hands scrabbled at the iron grip around his neck. He was losing. He was being crushed. His danger sense was a dull, constant roar, offering no escape. He looked past Aquaman's shoulder, his gaze falling on a faded warning label on the vat he was pinned against. Danger, anhydrous sodium sulfate. Severe desiccant. Avoid moisture, desiccant. A drying agent. Atlantean physiology requires hydration. Batman's words. It was his only chance. A desperate final gambit. With the last of his strength, he stopped struggling against Aquaman's grip. Instead, he channeled a focused, concentrated burst of one for all, not into a punch, but into his legs. He kicked not at Aquaman, but at the vat behind him. His boots, reinforced with Batman's technology, struck the rusted metal with the force of a battering ram. He wasn't trying to dent it. He was trying to rupture it. For a second, nothing happened. Aquaman's grip tightened, a cruel smile touching his lips. Then, with a high-pitched screech of tearing metal, a seam on the vat split open. It wasn't a liquid that poured out. It was a fine, white powder cascading from the tear in a thick, choking cloud. Anhydrous sodium sulfate, a powerful dehydrating agent, instantly filled the air. The effect on Aquaman was immediate and horrific. The powder clung to his wet skin, his hair, his clothes. He inhaled it. He had brought the sea with him, and now it was his undoing. The powder began to aggressively suck the moisture from his body. He roared not in anger, but in sudden, agonizing pain. He dropped Deku, stumbling back, clawing at his skin. The Regal King was gone, replaced by a creature in torment. His skin, moments before glowing with health, began to look dry, cracked, and pale. The water that had swirled at his feet evaporated into steam as the powder touched it. What is this sorcery? He gasped, his powerful voice now a dry rasp. He fell to one knee, his strength failing him with shocking speed. He was a sea creature in a desert, and the desert had just materialized around him. Deku collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, his throat raw. He watched as the mighty Aquaman was brought low, not by a punch, but by basic chemistry. He felt a pang of pity, but he suppressed it. He had a mission. He staggered to his feet, his body a symphony of pain. He lunged forward, his right gauntlet primed with the second diagnostic tag. Aquaman, weakened and disoriented, tried to raise his trident, but his movements were sluggish, his muscles screaming for the water that was being stolen from them. Deku slapped the tag onto the back of Aquaman's neck. The injector clicked, and the nanites were delivered. At that moment, the roof of the warehouse was torn away. Green Lantern, his face a mask of pure fury, hovered above. The psychological assault had ended, his training and the Brainiac programming reasserting control. The flicker of Hal Jordan, the grieving sun, was gone. Only the Warden remained. Error neutralized, he bellowed, his ring glowing with terrifying intensity. Deleting anomaly. A dozen green constructs, missiles, fists, giant mallets, materialized above him, all aimed at the warehouse. There was no time to think. Deku grabbed the fallen trident. It was impossibly heavy, a testament to Aquaman's strength. With a desperate, full-throated roar that was part defiance and part agony, he used the last vestiges of his power. Plus Ultra! He didn't throw the trident. He swung it, channeling a final, ragged 100% smash through it. The resulting impact with the ground didn't just crack the floor, it pulverized it. The floor of the warehouse, already compromised by age and the fight, collapsed entirely. Deku, along with the weakened Aquaman, plummeted into the darkness below, into the sprawling, labyrinthine sewer system of Gotham. The green constructs slammed into the space where they had been, obliterating the remnants of the warehouse in a cataclysmic explosion of emerald light and splintered steel. Deku awoke to the gentle lapping of foul water and the stench of decay. He was in a massive sewer junction, the darkness broken only by faint light from a street-level grate far above. His body was a single, unified landscape of pain. He was fairly certain he had 3, maybe 4, cracked ribs, and his left arm was sprained. One for all was a deadened silence in his veins. He pushed himself up, his head spinning. A few feet away, half submerged in the filthy water, lay Aquaman. The hydration from the sewer was slowly reviving him, but he was still weak, the diagnostic tag blinking faintly on his neck. Deku had to get out of there before he recovered fully. He limped through the tunnels, using the faint trickle of data from his remote monitor to guide him back toward the Batcave's hidden entrance. Every step was an ordeal. He was running on sheer stubborn will. He finally stumbled back into the cave, collapsing onto the cold concrete floor, the rubble from his entrance digging into his back. He lay there for a long time, just breathing. He had survived. He had succeeded. But the cost was immense. He was broken, battered, and had barely escaped with his life. After what felt like an eternity, he dragged himself to the computer. He plugged in his monitor, and the new data flooded the system. The signal in Aquaman was identical, a perfect match to the one in the Flash, and the one Bruce Wayne had first detected. The hive mind was confirmed. The path to victory, creating a counter-frequency, was clearer, but his ability to reach that path was diminishing with every fight. He was learning. But he was also breaking. He slumped into the Bat computer's chair, the worn leather groaning under his weight. He allowed himself a moment, just a single moment, to close his eyes. The moment was shattered by the calm, recorded voice of Batman. Warning. A new asset is approaching Gotham City. Airspeed Mach 3. No energy signature. No technological signature. Classification, Old God. Deku's eyes snapped open. A knot of pure dread, colder and deeper than any he had felt before, tightened in his stomach. He looked at the main screen. The Bat computer was cross-referencing the approach vector and speed with its database. An image resolved on the screen. A woman of impossible beauty and fearsome power, clad in red, blue, and gold armor. Warden asset identified, the computer stated with chilling finality. Wonder Woman. Deku stared at the image of the Amazon warrior. He had survived the unstoppable force. He had survived the raging sea. But now, the goddess of truth herself was coming for him, and he was out of tricks, out of plans, and almost entirely out of power.